So I want to say from the start that I am a very firm believer in counseling and therapy. I think counseling and therapy is a good thing. I think it's a really healthy thing. I have a counselor. In fact, I think every pastor should have a counselor.
Yes.
I think we would have less pastors getting in things they shouldn't get into if they had therapy. And so the cadence varies. Like with my counselor, there are times where something emerges and we meet like every week for a couple months. And then there are times like now where we haven't met in 6 months. So just because you go into counseling or therapy doesn't mean that for the rest of your life, every single week, you're going to sit on a couch and a guy's going to look at you with his sad eyes and you're going to cry. That's not necessarily what counseling or therapy is. And I think for some of us, and I am including myself in this, therapy and counseling is probably going to be necessary for dealing with negative emotions like anger. For some of us, and I'm myself, you're not going to be able to do it by yourself. You need help. You need a guide. So early in ministry, I went to counseling, and I went because I wanted to be a healthier pastor and a healthier husband. And there wasn't really a particular issue I was dealing with at the time, which I look back at that person and I think, you were way more jacked up than you had any idea. Like, you were pretty messed up. But at the time, I didn't, I knew at least enough, not much, that maybe this would be a good thing to do. And as a little bit of an aside, my first counselor, we didn't really gel. We didn't connect. I went a couple of times. And counseling, it's just like anything else. Just because you connect once and it didn't feel like it worked, that doesn't mean that therapy doesn't work. It just means you got to find someone new. And so my current counselor, he's amazing. But it took a few counselors to get to. So, however, despite this, with this first counselor, I did find some healing in some places that I wasn't expecting. And one of the things that she taught me to do is what's called visual imagery. And you've actually been doing visual imagery all your life. Like when you read a book, you're creating in your imagination images in mind of that book. And have you ever watched like a show or a movie, and you found yourself really disappointed because the characters didn't look the same? Like maybe the hero in your mind was far taller and handsome, and this guy looks like a dork. I don't know. But we use visual imagery all the time. We use visual imagery when we want something good to happen. So PJ uses visual imagery when he gets up into the tee box to launch those 300-yard drives. And it seems like Caleb Williams could benefit from some visual imagery. So when I was in my early 20s, I struggled with insomnia. And so my counselor taught me how to use visual imagery as a form and a way of quieting my mind. Now, I also met with a doctor who prescribed me anxiety medication to help me sleep. And there is anxiety and depression that is just our own doing, our own imagination, but there's a lot that isn't. It's just a chemical imbalance. And so if you grew up in a religious tradition like I did, where for some reason next to Halloween was anxiety medication and cocaine, like if that was your background, you don't win any battles by fighting something you can't actually beat. Like if you needed blood pressure medicine, you take blood pressure medicine. So if you're like me and your mind does not work like a Honda Civic, but it's a bunch of raccoons sorting through a dumpster, then you should just consider that. So my counselor, here's what she had me do. She said, close your eyes and imagine the most kind of serene, the most peaceful thing you could. And then she said, what do you see? And I responded that at the time, for me, the most peaceful scene I could think of was being by a river that kind of cut through the mountains. I visualized myself sitting in a rocking chair in a cabin. There was a pile of books on one side, a steaming cup of coffee on the other, and I'm just listening and watching the river. And so this was a tool that my counselor taught me to use to combat insomnia. And so to this day, I love the mountains. I love the rivers that cut through them, and I've had a lot of really good conversations sitting on cabin porches just listening to the river. So today, we're going to have a riverside chat. Last time we had a beach chat. Today we're going to have a riverside chat. And the last time I preached on why we get angry and kind of where anger comes from. But today I want to get into how do we practically transform our anger. And so in our chat, we're going to discuss 3 things that we have to do if we want to deal with our anger. 3 things that if we can do this, we're going to level up in our life. So the first thing you have to do when it comes to anger is you must admit it. First thing, you must admit it. Proverbs 28:13 says, "Whoever conceals his transgressions will not prosper, but he who confesses and forsakes them will obtain mercy." So the first step to being angry well, because remember, it's not that we're trying to have no anger, we're trying to have slow anger. And the first step is that you have to own it. You have to be willing to take responsibility. And so I'm reminded of being very early in ministry, and I cut my teeth as a way too young college pastor. And I spent a lot of my time in coffee shops with dudes, helping them work out life and theology. And back in the day, some of you may remember this, we had this really cool, quaint coffee shop called Caravan Coffee. There was just one little caveat. Caravan Coffee was right next to the police station, which is fine, but you'd be sitting outside and all of a sudden, the police car would come by and there'd be someone in the back seat, and that was not an Uber. I don't think he got 5 stars, although the person in the back might have been seeing some stars. So it didn't make it. It didn't make it. But I was sitting there, and I'll never forget this conversation with one guy. He was just recently married, and we're sitting there, and we're walking through some of the challenges he had. And I knew a lot about his challenges from both his side and his wife's side. And as he's discussing, he's just making up excuse after excuse after excuse. And I look at him, and I go, if you don't deal with your anger, this isn't going to work. And I remember leaving that coffee shop, and I thought to myself, man, if he doesn't deal with this, in 2 years, he'll be divorced. And in 2 years, he was divorced. He doesn't see his daughter. They live in a different state. Why? Because he wouldn't deal with his anger. You have to own it. You need to be willing to take responsibility, because nobody is responsible for the way you respond except you. And you need to hear that. No one is responsible for your behavior except you. And here's the myth that we allow ourselves to believe: they caused me to act this way. But it's a myth. No one caused you to act any way in any situation. You're the only one who gets to decide how you will respond. Now, they may have provoked you to anger, they may have hurt you, but you made the decision to lash out. That you made the decision to abandon being slow to anger. And what happens then is, here's what we do. We start making excuses. And friends, we're really good at excuses. So a common example of this is when someone is late to a meeting and you say to yourself, they're late because they don't know how to manage their time, or they're lazy. But then you're late, and you're late because, well, there was traffic. I got held up. This person couldn't decide their Starbucks order, and I was waiting in line. See, we do this self-justification all the time, and we're masters at it. We're pro, and in fact, get this, we're so good at it, we fool ourselves. That's how good we are. We literally fool ourselves with our self-justification, and then it moves into self-deception. And that's why we're shocked when someone says, we were short, we were mean, we were curt, we were selfish, we were angry, we were rude. We can't believe it because we've fooled ourselves, and we've chosen to believe a narrative about ourselves that it makes us the protagonist in every interaction we have. And over the past few years, some of the pastors of the largest churches in America have been removed. Now, a lot of them have been removed because of sexual sin. Others have been removed because of money. But one of the biggest growing trends is they've been removed because of anger. That they got to a place where their self-justification became self-deception, and a board have to step in and say, you're done. It's over. Because they had fooled themselves into thinking, I don't have an issue. Now, before you're quick to point a finger, the same can be said as us. You have to own it. That's step one. You have to admit it. But admitting it means I've got to be honest about it. And to admit you are angry is an act of vulnerability. Like, I applaud you when you admit you're angry because it's vulnerable, it's embarrassing, but at the end of the day, here's what it is: an honest assessment of where I'm actually at. And so when you admit you're angry, and when you're honest with those you hurt, here's what you're doing. You are validating their feelings instead of dismissing them. You're acknowledging I hurt you. That was not right. I broke the atmosphere of peace with my decision to act in anger. You've got to be honest about it. We learned in the first part that anger, it is like dynamite to relationships. So first, what we have to do is we've got to be honest about it with ourselves. That in those moments when you lash out, where you overreact, where you yell, you stew, you pout, you need to be honest with yourself and admit it. But then secondly, you need to be honest with others. And I think those of you who have a tendency to yell or lash out, you're kind of at an advantage because there's no hiding that. It's right there. Everybody saw it. Your spouse saw it. The kids saw it. The neighbor saw it. Everyone saw it. But for most of us, that's probably not how our anger emerges. It's not as easy because we can kind of hide it. A lot of our anger is stewing. It's jealous. It's kind of that subtweet type of anger. For most of us, the anger is a bit more under the surface. And then no one really sees it unless they're really close to you. And so we need to own up with other people, to be willing to be vulnerable. And here's what that means. It means inviting them into the darkest places of our life. And the enemy has done an incredible job getting us to think that we are the only ones who deal with certain things. The truth is, you have never had a wicked thought that 100,000 other people have had. You have never done something so deceitful that 100,000 other people have done it. One of my favorite philosophers, his name is Soren Kierkegaard, and he tells this story about a night guard. It's an imaginary story, but in the story, the night guard is to guard all of the ammunition. He's to guard all of the combustible dynamite. And he guards it, and he has this thought: what would happen if I lit it all? Now, wait, before you laugh, let me bring it to you. It's that thought you have when you're on a really high bridge over a river, and you have this sudden urge to jump. Why? Because it's just simply human nature. Something we probably wouldn't have told the people next to us, even though they were probably also thinking it for some reason. And the enemy knows this. If you open the darkest door of your life, even just a little, the light of the gospel will shine through the cracks. And so he masterfully convinces us, keep locked the dark parts. But if you want to level up, there's only one route. You have to invite people into the darkest parts of your life. So how do you do that practically? Super easy. Next time you're at Starbucks and you're debating whether you want to look cool and order an Americano or a flat white, or do you want to tap into that 16-year-old Taylor Swift singing girl inside of you and get a venti caramel frappuccino with extra whip, when you get up to the order, just say, "Hi, my name is Mark with a C, and this is my darkest issue." And watch as the barista slowly walks away. I'm kidding. Don't actually do that. No, it actually is simple. It's sharing what is really going on with those who really care. That's all it is. It's just sharing what is really going on with those who really care. Let them in. Talk about the ways that you've hidden anger. Tell them how you find it pops up. Ask them to help keep you accountable, to check in and see how things are going. So that's the first thing. If you want to level up in your anger, then you need to open up. The second piece to it is this: you have to analyze it. You need to analyze it. Proverbs 3:13, it says, "Blessed is the one who finds wisdom," and then notice the second part, "and the one who gets understanding." So if you analyze your anger, you're going to gain wisdom. So you've got to do the difficult work of being in touch and understanding your specific anger. And it is specific. So here's just a very simple, easy starting question. What makes you angry? What makes you angry? Because it's not everything. Like, I don't know why I am like this, but I get angry in traffic. Now, I'm not going to throw any birds. I'm not going to scream or yell necessarily, but I will use my horn. That's why we have it. Why else would they have horns if we weren't supposed to use it? And I will at times cut people off. I'm just being honest. I'm on the interstate a lot, and I'm like, but there's 3 lanes. And why are you in my lane. And I was literally driving home from work. Carissa calls me, and I'm merging on, and the semi didn't actually move over. So, I mean, this one's a little different. But you can hear me honking, and she literally goes, "I love you, sweetie. Drive safe." And then on I go. I don't know why I'm like that, but for me, that's a trigger. And for some of you, you're like, yes, I'm right there with you. And others, you're like, why would you be like that? Dude, chill out. And that's the danger. Because we feel this sense of moral superiority when we are not angry at the things that other people are. However, we all have different things that make us angry. So have you done the work of identifying what are those things? Because these become our trigger points, but they also become our warning signs. So I'll give you another personal example. I am very competitive. I don't like to lose. In fact, and only some of you will get this, all I do is win, win, win no matter what. Got money on my mind, I can never get enough. And every time I step into the building, everyone's hands go up, and what do? They stay there. Thank you very much. Some of you are like, what just happened? But on the other hand, I never get mad watching sports. Like, I love sports, but if my team doesn't win, oh well. Like, there's nothing I can do that a 23-year-old boy, dropped a ball that was thrown from a 26-year-old boy. Like, I'm not going to be angry about it because that's just not simply a trigger area for me. Now, these are simplistic examples, but there are many areas in your life where, like the proverb says, you need to find wisdom. That you need to seek out and analyze life and ask yourself the honest question, what are my trigger points? What are the areas I'm missing it, where maybe I get too hot, where I need to become more acutely aware of my emotions? Or what are the things that I tend to be petty about, that I tend to sulk about, that I tend to stew about? What are those trigger points? And please listen to this. You are responsible. Your ignorance about areas of your life does not mean you're not accountable to those around you. Because the pain you cause, whether you are aware of it or not, it's still pain to them. And I get that's a punch in the gut statement. But that is why we must strive to uncover what makes me angry. What are those things that I am putting out emotional grenades in the relationships and by those around me? So why do you get angry? Because critical to understanding anger is we've got to find what is the root. Because anger is often a reaction to a much deeper issue. You got to get in touch with your anger. So speaking of driving, has anyone noticed how crazy the traffic has gotten in Ocala? It's like Mad Max out there. How many of you, by a show of hands, you would say you're above average driver? Like, how many of you, come on now, be honest, that you're a good driver, All right, perfect. You know, one of the things that really surprises me is how much we assume about ourselves. Because over 50% of you said you were above average driver, which is statistically impossible. And that is because much of our perception of ourselves, it's not accurate. So research has shown that your IQ is going to help you in about 20% of life. The other 80% is your EQ. That's your emotional intelligence. And so when I was in higher education, we would have our students take an emotional intelligence assessment. But then we would also have fellow students assess their emotional intelligence with the same assessment. And this won't shock you, the scores for those who scored themselves were statistically significant, way higher than those who had scored them. And it's because we have a perception bias of ourselves. We tend to assume the best in us, we make excuses, but often the worst in others. So like we mentioned earlier, it's the idea that you were late because you're lazy. I was late because there was traffic. And then what happens is we have this moment where we blow up. You've had it, I've had it. This happened to me a number of years ago. It was after a college event, and it was really late, and I was hungry and desperate. And how many know when it's late and you're hungry and desperate that you make trash panda type decisions? Trash pandas are just raccoons for you more polished folks. So I'm like, nothing is open. I'm just going to drive through McDonald's. Only God can judge me. And it was the second worst fast food experience I've ever had. And now all some of you are thinking of, well, what was the worst one you had? That's another story for another day. But I waited, went to the line, and I'm in that little parking area where they are supposed to bring it out to you. So after 35 minutes of waiting, and there's no one else around, it's like midnight, I finally go inside, and I wasn't mean, I didn't yell, but I was very short, I was very curt with the person working there. And after I ate, I thought to myself, yes, it was inconvenient, it was bad service, but why did I have to be so short and curt? Did he really deserve me treating him like that? Maybe he honestly forgot. Maybe he's having a brutal day. And things like that have happened to you where you reflect back and you go, why did I act that way? And it's because in the moment you were not in touch with your anger. And when we're not aware of what makes us tick, we are then not aware of where we should avoid conflict or making decisions. And there's an old adage, and you've probably heard it before, never make decisions when you're hungry, tired, lonely, or angry. Like all four of those areas, if you're hungry, tired, lonely, angry, those are just not good spaces to make decisions. And so speaking of anger, the best thing to do is to run. Now, sometimes literally for some of us, but there is some truth to just cooling off, because here's what happens on a neurological level. When we get angry, our blood pressure rises. We move from the front part of our brain, which is where we make good decisions, and move back here to fight or flight, which for most of us it means fight when we're feeling angry. And so sometimes the best thing we can do is just leave the scenario. Don't respond to the text. Avoid the email. Don't return the call. Wait 30 minutes. Cool off. Wait till the next day if need be. But the only way we can get the power to do this, so we don't just make knee-jerk reactions, is if we're in touch with our anger and not surprised by it. Doesn't mean we're not going to make mistakes. Doesn't mean we're not going to blow up at times. But when we are in touch with our anger, we're not then surprised by our anger. So what is some of the roots for you? What is the maybe brokenness of your past that causes you to get angry? Or what is it about your temperament that causes you to get angry? What is it about your personality? Like sometimes it's a very deep issue, like a father wound, but sometimes the issue is simply our wiring. I am a 3 on the Enneagram. I'm a D on the DISC. Achiever is my number 2 in Strength Finders. I wake up and eat goals for breakfast and strategy for lunch. Like that's just how I'm wired. And so in my personality, I hate when things are slow. And I have to remind myself, that's on me. Like there's no reason to get angry just because a scenario is not going at the speed that I want. But you have to know that about yourself. So this is the more internal side of analyzing your anger. But there's also an external side. And I think here is the key to analyzing external anger. That what makes you angry is not what happens to you, but what you tell yourself about what happens to you. And so what makes you angry is not what happens to you, but it's what you tell yourself about what happens to you. Because anger is not really about the circumstance. It's about your interpretation of what happened. And your anger comes from what you believe, not what people are doing to you. So your emotions are not victim to your circumstances. No one can change the way you feel, the way you respond. They can provoke you, they can stir you, but we still choose how we're going to respond. So someone yells some sort of slur at you, someone tailgates you on the way to home. I'm sorry for that. Someone comments something mean on Facebook. Someone throws shade at you in a group text. Parent says something condescending. Child says something snarky. You choose how to respond. And you don't have to. Say a lot for those in the back. You don't have to respond. In these scenarios and in a lot of the ones that come up, we don't necessarily have to respond. So let me set you free. In most of the occasions that make us angry, we don't owe a response. Because most of the time, where we get angriest are really with people we don't even really know or know that well. You don't owe them a response. So let me ask you a question. What happens when you wrestle with a pig? You get dirty, and the pig likes it. And I'm not calling those who provoke you pigs. The point is, responding to someone else's insecurity, ignorance, or anger, it's not going to produce joy in you. You're free. You you don't owe them a response. Now, of course, if this is, with your family, someone you're close to, it's a little bit different. But there's a lot of scenarios that we get really hyped up in culture and in the news, and we could have a long laundry list that we don't actually have to respond because they don't get to dictate your emotional status. That's up to you. And if we're honest, most of the time when we defend our anger, what we're actually defending is our ego. It's that sense of like, how dare they? But you are free to not respond. And lastly, the third idea here is you must transform your anger. Romans 12:2, it says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Do not be conformed to this world. What Paul is presenting here is that there is something we should be conformed to, and that's the cross. That through the cross, we can be transformed by the renewal of our minds. And when we recognize God's open forgiveness in the cross, it sustains us to do what? To offer love to others, but also to offer love to ourselves. It gives us the strength to not lash out in anger. And so the way we transform our anger, it's through the power of the cross. And so what's interesting about real spiritual growth is that real spiritual growth is not that yesterday you read one chapter of the Bible and today you read 10. Real spiritual growth is when we begin to recognize I need a Savior today as much as I needed one the day I accepted Christ. And what happens as we deepen our faith is we begin to recognize more and more of how sinful we really are. And it's not that we're actually becoming more sinful. It's the opposite. We're becoming holier and we're more aware of the sinfulness. See, when we're first saved, for most of us, we don't have a real good tendency, a very accurate view of our sinfulness. And the reason is because we look primarily at external sins. We did this, we did that, but most of the sin takes place in our heart. Those places that need to be healed: pride, fear, ego, selfishness, control. And in spiritual growth, as you begin to see the cross and you begin to see God as holy and holy and holy, and you recognize your sinfulness, it creates this chasm. But true spiritual growth, here's what happens. The cross just looms larger and larger and larger, making us even more aware of the transformative work of Jesus. Because a mark of Christian maturity is that we run towards God when we sin and not from him. And growth as Christians is really about growth in our understanding of the depths of the gospel. That the gospel is not the ABCs of life, it is the A to Zs of life. That we never move on from the gospel. Rather, there's just a greater awareness of our need for a Savior as we move through the Christian life. So I want to end today by giving us a really just practical way that we can apply what we've talked about. Here's how we start. First, when you get angry, you recognize and you own it, and you talk to God about it. And so I'll do this. A situation comes up. I feel angry. I talk to God. God, I feel angry right now. I own it. I recognize I'm having a hard time dealing with it. I need your help to transform this anger through the power of the cross. I recognize the forgiveness in this moment you give me all the time. I want to offer forgiveness to others. So talk to God about it. Don't start by trying to sort out your anger on your own. Second is learning to expand our anger vocabulary. And this is huge. I wish I knew this 15 years ago. Because the reason young children seem to overact when they get angry is they don't have an anger vocabulary, but a lot of adults don't either. And to say in any given situation, I'm angry, well, that's not really that helpful. It's the equivalent of going to the doctor saying, I feel sick. Well, okay, but how do you feel sick? Because the prescription for migraines or a stomach bug are very, very different. And anger is complex. We have to learn to expand our vocabulary. And so here's what I mean. Do you have resentment or do you have impatience? Those are two very different types of anger. Do you have rage, or is this a slow burn? Are you exasperated? Are you being indignant? Because when we expand our anger vocabulary, we begin to see, okay, this is what is really stirring in me. It's not that I'm just angry. It's that I am having exasperation over this scenario. It's not that I'm just angry, it's that I am resentful for what this person did. Because when you can self-diagnose what your anger is in the moment, you can find healing because you've uncovered the actual issue. And then next, we walk through our anger with God. And there's the pattern. We begin with God and we go back to God. And it's saying something like this: God, in this moment I realize I have resentment. I have resentment towards fill in the blank, the person. I have resentment because I feel like lately it's been all about them. Maybe they're being selfish right now, or maybe I'm not seeing the whole picture. Lord, I recognize this anger is resentment. Forgive me of that. Help my mind to be renewed and give me the strength that whether they're being selfish or not, that you would help me to serve and love them. And God, give clarity to whether they're being selfish, and if I need to talk to them about the resentment I feel and why I feel it. And listen, this process works. And I know it works because I've been applying it over the past few years. It's recognizing our anger. It is bringing it to God. It's identifying through kind of a broadening anger vocabulary of why I'm angry, and then it's processing it with God. So this is one single move, and you can level up in your life. Because if you choose to live a life where you're going to address anger head on, you're going to have more joy, you're going to have more peace, you're going to have more prosperity in all areas of your life. Your relationships will be blessed. People will see you coming, and they'll get excited. People will want to spend time with you, to be around you. And the closest relationships to you, they'll feel trust and security with you. It's one single move that you can level up, is navigating your anger.